Jamie Raskin is not having any of the GOP's attempts to manipulate the U.S. Census to try to help them in future elections. On the House floor today, there was a moment in which Jamie Raskin had a little test from a Republican who thought he would try to outsmart Raskin on the Pledge of Allegiance, and Jamie Raskin put him in his place by giving him a little lesson, as Jamie Raskin is known to do, being a former constitutional professor.
First of all, our Pledge of Allegiance, which we say every day, we pledge allegiance to the republic for which we stand, right? The flag and the republic for which we stand. When Benjamin Franklin, after our Constitution was ratified, he talked about giving us a republic if we can keep it. And I think people should analyze those two little quotes and wonder why there were references to republic in both of them. In any event.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I'm about to yield to my friend, Ms. Meng from New York, but I'm inspired by the remarks of the gentleman from Wisconsin, especially about the word republic, which of course comes from res publica, the public thing. He happened upon a subject that's of a lot of interest to me because I wrote a paper about it when I was in 6th grade, the Pledge of Allegiance. It was written by a radical Baptist minister named Francis Bellamy. I'm not sure if the gentleman's aware of that, on the 400th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the New World. And Reverend Bellamy, who was an abolitionist in Vermont, was concerned about the continuing salute of the Confederate battle flag in the southern states. And so he wanted to write a flag salute that would be unifying for the Union. And he wrote, "I pledge allegiance to my flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, with liberty and justice for all." And you notice what is not in there. He did not have "under God." That was added in 1954 by Congress, several weeks after the Supreme Court's decision in Brown versus Board of Education. But in any event, I'm not quite sure what the relevance is of the gentleman's invocation of the Republic or of Ben Franklin and the famous vignette about him saying, if you can keep it. Ben Franklin was, of course, a big supporter of immigration to the country, although he did display an anti-German bias in some of his writings. But I'll tell you a little story about Ben Franklin that might be of relevance to what the gentleman's talking about. Apparently, because I just did a tour in Philadelphia with the Ben Franklin people up there, and we learned this wonderful story. He made a loan to a friend of his for $100, and then he recorded in his diary that this gentleman he made a loan to for $100, Josiah, was always disappearing behind a tree or a building whenever Ben came along. And he finally caught up with him and he said, "Josiah, you know, I loaned you $100, and I'm wondering, am I going to be able to get my principal back, or at least the interest?" And Josiah said, "Well, Ben, look, the $100 is well invested somewhere else, so you don't have to worry about that." And Franklin said, "Well, what about the interest?" He said, "Well, I forgot to tell you that it's against my religion to pay interest, so I can't pay you the interest." So Franklin said, "You mean to tell me it's against your principal to pay me the interest, and it's against your interest to pay me the principal?" And Josiah said, "Well, that's right." So Franklin said, "Well, I can see I'm not going to get either." Well, look, here our principles and our interests converge very much. The principles are set forth in the Constitution, which is we count everybody, and everybody is part of the census, and everybody is part of the reapportionment process. It's been like that since 1790. We don't need to start finger painting on the Constitution with this silly election year proposal. But it's also in our interests because, as my colleagues have said, this is a land that is built on immigration, except for the Native Americans who are already here and the people who were brought over as slaves. All of us are the descendants of immigrants to this country. Tom Paine said when he got to America in 1774, 2 years before the Revolution, he said, "This land, if it lives up to its principles, will become an asylum to humanity." Not an insane asylum, mind you. An asylum to humanity, a place of refuge for people seeking freedom from religious, political, and economic oppression. That's who we are.
These Republicans keep trying to test Jamie Raskin, one of the best ever to sit in the United States Congress, and it keeps just bouncing back and hitting them in the face. They just look so stupid and uneducated. They look like the delusional, childish GOP that we know that they are, which is why Jamie Raskin referenced a paper he wrote in the 6th grade. He also brought up finger painting the Constitution, and then that great line at the end there that America was founded to be an asylum for humanity, not an insane asylum, which is what the Republican Party has turned into in the House of Representatives. Now, if you want to know more about the Republicans' attacks on the U.S. Census, then watch this next clip of Jamie Raskin give another lesson on what they're trying to do.
Thank you very much. Always a delight to be back in the Rules Committee. We could do what the gentleman from Arizona invites us to do, but it would be completely unconstitutional. The last president tried to include a citizenship question on the decennial census in 2020 and to count only U.S. citizens in the census, as this legislation would do. And it failed for completely obvious reasons. Section 2 of the 14th Amendment states that apportionment of seats in the House is based on a count of, quote, the whole number of persons in each state, unquote, persons being the all-encompassing category larger than that of citizens or voters. When the framers wanted to impose a citizenship requirement, they sure knew how to do it. For example, when they said that the president must be a born U.S. citizen and not a naturalized citizen. Some people think that was because Thomas Jefferson was moving to block Alexander Hamilton from running for president. But in any event, it's right in the Constitution, just like it says we, as members of the House, we have to be U.S. citizens for at least 7 years, which is why if you've been naturalized in the last 3 or 4 years, you can't do it. The Supreme Court has been perfectly clear about this and made this point emphatically in a unanimous 2016 decision called Evanwell versus Abbott. And like this legislation itself, Evanwell involved a challenge to congressional apportionment based on a total count of the entire population instead of just a count of the voter population. But Justice Ginsburg held for the unanimous court that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, quote, retained total population as the congressional apportionment base. She cited the speech made by Senator Jacob Howard upon introduction of Section 2 of the 14th Amendment. Quote, he said, the basis of representation is numbers. The committee adopted numbers as the most just and satisfactory basis, and this is the principle upon which the Constitution itself was originally framed, that the basis of representation should depend upon numbers. And such, I think, after all, is the safest and most secure principle upon which the government can rest. Numbers, not voters. Numbers, not property. This is the theory of our Constitution. Justice Ginsburg included lots of decisive legislative authority like this, including the floor statement of Representative James Blaine, who stated that, quote, no one will deny that population is the true basis of representation. For women, children, and other non-voting classes may have as vital an interest in the legislation of the country as those who actually deposit the ballot. And therefore, they all must be counted. For all of you constitutional textualists out there, the plain reading of the text is clear. Clear as day. For all of you constitutional originalists, the original purposes of the passage of the 14th Amendment have been carefully articulated and revisited repeatedly by the Supreme Court and never rebutted by any contrary legislative authority. For all of you members who like to follow precedent, every apportionment since 1790 has included every single person residing in the United States, not just those lucky enough to be given the right to vote. As the Evanwell Court noted, the 14th Amendment contemplates that representatives serve all residents, not just those eligible to vote. You don't enforce the 14th Amendment under Section 5 by violating the terms of the constitutional amendment. The meaning is indisputable, a point which settles this for anyone who wants to follow the Constitution's text and original public meaning in all cases, not just when the text favors our desired policy outcome. I remember the admonition from the former chairman of this committee, the gentleman from Oklahoma, who would tell us that we should get our work done and not waste time on legislation that will never pass the Senate, never get signed by the president, and certainly never be approved by the Supreme Court. This bill is an affront to the great radical Republicans who wrote the original Constitution and the 14th Amendment, which has always made persons, not voters, the basis for reapportionment. The census is essential to democracy, just as the framers endorsed Tom Paine's common sense. They endorsed a common census. This bill would destroy the accuracy of the census, which may have something to do with its real legislative motivation. In the 2010 census, the undercount of Hispanic U.S. citizens was 1.4%, but in 2020, that number grew to 5%. Many observers credit that 300% plus jump to the last administration's attempt to add a citizenship question to the census and all of the publicity and rumor surrounding that attempt. The addition of a question about citizenship will deter many immigrants, not only the undocumented, but persons with green cards and people who are U.S. citizens from completing the census. Many non-citizen immigrants who are seeking asylum or are refugees will avoid responding because of uncertainty over their status and fear of arbitrary law enforcement action. Extensive research over the last decade shows that many residents wrongly believe the Census Bureau shares personal responses with other agencies. They don't. Federal law prohibits the sharing of information in this way, but that worry has prevented many people from answering questions about immigration status or responding to the census at all. Census data guide the allocation of $2.8 trillion each year in federal assistance to states, localities, and families for a broad range of vital services. An inaccurate census would skew the fair distribution of federal resources for the next decade and deprive many cities and towns in places like Texas and California of needed resources for everything from roads to hospitals and veterans care. I strongly oppose this legislation, Mr. Chairman, which dishonors and violates our Constitution and the values of our nation. I yield back.
Thanks again for watching. My name is Brendan Plank with Reflect. Be sure to like this video and share it with your friends. And if you haven't subscribed and turn on notifications for Reflect, be sure to do that so you get my next video in your inbox, which, you know, the chances are very high that Jamie Raskin in the very near future will make another appearance on Reflect, embarrassing the Republican Party. I'll see you in the next video.